Hey everyone, my name is Andy Beverly, for those who don't know me. What I'm going to do is, I've called it Dancing Around the World. I'm going to give a talk about translations and internationalisation. Managed to say it okay. And what it does is it builds upon a talk I did last year. For those who were here last year, I talked about a plugin called LogReport. I very briefly touched on the translations functionality in that, but I didn't go into any detail. So what I wanted to do now is talk about that functionality within the plugin. But what I'm going to do for the first sort of third of the talk or so, I'm just going to give a recap on what I covered last year. I'm not going to go into any of the detail. I'm just going to sort of set out what the plugin does, and hopefully just give an outline so that it makes it a little bit easier when we go on to the other aspects. Quite happy for you to chip in with any questions as we go along. They say never start a presentation with an apology. I'm not going to do quite that, but what I will say is that I'm maybe not the best qualified person to be talking about translations, because I'm as guilty as any other person who speaks English as their native language, and I assume that everyone speaks English. And I write all my code and applications in English, which is very easy. But then, of course, there are times when you do want to translate, or you want to write an application that you might want to translate in the future. The reason I had to do some translation stuff, and the thing that got me interested in this, was I had to actually translate a website from UK English into American English. Just the reason I'm telling you that is just so you know, I've not used this that extensively. So although I'll do my best to answer any questions, I'm by no means any expert. Like I said, I'll do a quick recap. There's two modules that go hand in hand. One's a plugin, one's a logger. I'm not going to really touch on the logger. I talked about that last year. Happy to talk about it afterwards or over the next couple of days. But what I'm going to do is just give a quick recap on the plugin. Like I said, there's a lot of functionality in the plugin, but I think I probably put too much in the presentation last year, so I don't want to go into too much detail. So I'm just going to give some very brief overview of what it adds. So the idea of the plugin is that it combines all the logging, error handling, messages to the user, exceptions, and application errors all in one framework. And the reason that I wrote this plugin is because I found that there was a lot of commonality between those areas of an application, but they weren't quite as joined up as I'd like. So, for example, sometimes you might want a message to go to the user, sometimes you might want a message to go to your system logger, sometimes you might want a message to be sent to a system administrator, sometimes you like a combination of those. And what this does, it allows you to combine those all together and then configure them at runtime of the web application. So this is it in its very simplest form. Use Dancer 2, use the plugin. What it does is it gives you some keywords that allow you to send messages. And where those messages go depend on what the keyword is that you use. So there's some defaults. There's about 10 different keywords altogether, which I won't go into now. But just to give two examples, there's a keyword called notice, which is primarily designed to send a message to the user, so just let them know something. So here I'm just sending to the web page a simple message. And then there's another one called trace, which is designed to be debug information. But the point here is that although they're designed like that out of the box, you can then configure them to do different things. So if you decided that you wanted all your debug messages to go to the user, then you could do that just with a configuration change. But out of the box, that's how it works. So when I call notice and trace, the relevant messages in those will go to a session array, and then you can then display that on your template. So, like I said, out of the box, the notice message will go to the template, the trace message won't. And then to display that, I can just do some very simple code, such as this. So I can just iterate through all the messages in the session and display them. Like I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but just to give you a bit of a flavour of the sort of thing you can do. Each of those messages is actually an object, so you can overload it. You can add various functionality to it, and one of the functions that's available is a function to give a suitable colour if you're using the Bootstrap template. So here you can see I've just asked it to give me the Bootstrap colour for the relevant message and then to print the message. Message does it stringify, but when you're putting it in a template, you have to explicitly cause that to happen. Yeah, any questions on that so far? Like I said, what it also does is some exception handling. And like I said, what I wanted, although you could do this separately, what I wanted is for it all to be integrated. So there's a couple, again, I'm not going to go into all of them, but there's a couple of keywords that will raise an exception. and they're designed for different things. So I've given two examples there. One's called error, which obviously is the same as the current answer to internal logging error, which is slightly confusing. One's called panic. And they will both raise an exception and stop execution of the code at that point. But the beauty, and you might say, well, why have different levels? Well, the beauty of this is that you can raise an exception, but have it treated differently, or have it logged differently depending on what it is. So for example, you might want to, if you use exceptions for user error handling, which some people do, then you might not care about that when the application's running. In fact, you probably wouldn't care about that when the application's running. But likewise, if you had an exception happen for some other reason, like there's actually an internal code error, then you would want that to be notified. So these two keywords will both raise an exception, but will log it at different levels. So if you were to use a syslogger as your backend, which you can do very easily, then they'll be logged at different levels. So of course, like I say, the error exception I wouldn't want to be notified to a system administrator, but the panic level I would. So the panic level is actually higher. So both exceptions, but log at different levels, which is actually really, really useful when you start using it. And there are other ones as well. So just to give an example why this is useful, again, one of the things I found when I was writing some of my early advanced code is I was doing a lot of sort of if-else statements to check for errors, and it was such a pain that a lot of the time if I didn't think an error would happen, I wouldn't bother checking for it. But now with this, it's very, very easy just to throw in something like that. So just a simple error now access to that record if a condition is true. No other code, that's all you need to put in. And likewise, something internal that you might only expect a certain parameter to your module. The lazy programmer, if you didn't have this, in fact, probably any programmer, I would probably do it myself, wouldn't bother checking for an invalid parameter, but now it's very easy because I can just do a one-liner such as that. And what will that mean is if that panic ever happens, like I said, that's the high level, so that will straight away get notified to a system administrator if that's how you've got it configured. By default, both, if you don't do anything else, by default, both of those will just forward your user to the home page if it's in a case where it wasn't caught. So at least it's handled cleanly. What you can do though is you can catch it, and there's a try function similar to other try functions in other modules. This one's got quite a lot of functionality though. And what that will do is that will automatically send the message to the session messages array that I told you about before. So what I've seen some people do with their eval code and their exception handling is that they catch it, and then they have to have another 2 or 3 lines of code that say, if there was an exception raised, then log it to this area here, display it to the user, and so forth. And you find that you're writing 4 or 5 lines of code for just a simple statement. And there's also something called there's also the process keyword, which will return true or false depending on whether an exception was raised. So just to show you that in practice, I've got a subroutine here called write, which would have some code to do the writing in. If an error happened, I can just call error. So that's a user error. But in my root, I'd process it like that. And like I say, just a very short line of code there. So I use the process keyword to catch any errors. If there is an error, I don't need to do anything else because I know it's automatically been handled, automatically been sent to my template. I don't need any code in here to catch that. If there's not an error, then I just display a simple success message. So you can see that this massively reduces out the amount of code if you're going to be using exception-based error handling. Any questions on any of that? So like I said, this is just a recap on the stuff from last year. So I'm going to go on now to talk about the actual translations. And I'll start with a nice simple hello world example. So you'll notice on the messages that I was doing before, I was calling the appropriate keyword and then a string. Nice and easy. What we can do now is take that one level further and translate that string. And to start off with the very simplest function, there's a function which is simply just 2 underscores, and what that says is please translate this string. It literally is a function called underscore underscore. So the first example there is how you would normally use it. So you can see it's a very small amount of code you need to add to your application. The second line, it just gives it in a little bit more detail so you can see that, just to make it clear that it is actually a function because it looks a bit strange when you first see it. The first example would technically be possible, but it's just using the single quotes, but actually it's not valid because the underscore quote is a Perl an old Perl way of writing 2 colons, I think. Somebody here probably knows I don't. It's not valid anyway, it's the short answer. So yeah, just normally write the first one, and if you need to parenthesize it for any reason, then you can write the second one. And what that does, that'll generate one of these message objects that I talked about before, and it will tell the internal code, which I'll come on to shortly, that this string is to be translated. And the beauty of this is you can see that it's really easy as you're writing a web application to signify all the strings that you're writing in your code to be translated at a future date. And I do this automatically now. So if I'm writing a web application, if I think that, even if I don't think there's a chance that I'll need to translate in the future, well, it doesn't matter, because all I'm doing is putting 2 underscores at the front of every string. There's a lot of other functions which I'll come on to later, but what I'm going to do now is talk about how we then translate that text.
What made you decide to use the double-underscore?
It wasn't actually. I think it actually goes back to. It wasn't me that made that decision. There's another translation module from several years ago which uses it, and this is all built on LogReport, which uses double underscores. I guess it's just a nice, clean way, because of course you're going to have those littered all over your code. So if you had anything more than a few characters, it would start to get a bit overwhelming. Incidentally, the one thing I didn't say is that you can use all this outside of your Dancer application. So all you need to do is use the LogReport module in any of your modules, and you get access to all these, which will then, if you then use those modules in Dancer, you can then integrate that. So that's the other advantage of this module that I didn't talk about, is that you've got lots of logging functions that you don't have to rely on Dancer for. So if you've got a module that you've written that you use in other areas of your code or company or what have you, you can then integrate that really, really easy into Dancer application without having to have all those other modules with Dancer applications. So we've got our application, we've signified all the text that we want to be translated with the double underscores. What we now need to do is extract that text so that we can, into just a ASCII format, sorry, not necessarily ASCII, into some sort of string format, so that we can then translate that. And we do that using this script here called xgetTextPerl. Various options which I won't go into, but in its simplest format, you just call it from your current code directory. It will scan the entire code directory, pulling out any of those strings, and it'll dump them all in one file in the directory you've specified there. So I've called it messages, and it'll dump all the strings it finds in the messages directory. What it'll do is it'll dump them in something called the mine domain thing I'll come on to shortly. It'll dump them in a file similar to the first one there on the left-hand side of the copy command. So it'll, just with the format specified there, the character set, the domain, and the file extension. What you then do, and I'll show you some examples of those in a second, what you then do is copy that into a new file, which will be the relevant translations for a particular language. So you can see the example here is that I'm going to start creating a set of German translations. What it does is it puts them in a standard PO file. Who here is familiar with PO files? Or who's not? Sort of 50-50. PO files, they're not even Perl specific, they're just Linux specific? I don't know. No. Probably not even Linux specific, they're just a standard format. Any
translation agency can...
Yeah, okay.
It's the getText file.
Okay, it's the getText file, but I don't know what their background was, I just know that they're not anything specific to this module. And as I said there, I've come across times when people have decided to use their own format because they think they just need something very simple, text A to text B. My own advice really is don't do that. They are a little bit complicated when you first look at them, but they're complicated for a reason because languages are complicated. So don't reinvent the wheel. Do use PO files if you ever do translations. And that's all I really need to say on that, and the fact that they're a standard format. So just to give an example, when I ran that getText stripping tool, what it'll do, it'll have produced a PO file that will look something like this. There's a bunch of header information which I won't go into, but that describes the language. And then for each message it finds, it dumps the string text and where it was found. This is all PO format. The fuzzy is a flag, which says whether it's been translated or not, and then what it does is show the message ID and then the string that it should be translated into. So that's what it gives you when you dump the file, and this is what you would probably do with it. So you'd remove the fuzzy flag and then you'd add the translation. What you can then do as your application develops is you can keep repeating that stripping command, and it'll just update these files with the new strings that it finds. And of course the idea is that you can just give that to somebody else to do the actual hard work of the translating. So just a quick recap on what I've done so far. Write your code as normal, add the double underscore to all your strings, extract all those strings out of your application into PO files, and then update those PO files with the translated text. So now, how do we actually use those? What we do is we use the plugin, and then we configure a translator. It looks a little bit complicated, but you only need to use that once. And what that does is tell the plugin where to find the translation tables. I won't go into the full details of how it works. It just says where those PO files are and how to translate them. I'll just touch briefly on the domain. You'll see domain referred to throughout this presentation. A domain is just really a way of grouping together sets of PO files or sort of an application. And it just means that you can separate out all those sets of messages. So you might have a module that you want to use elsewhere, and you could have that in a separate domain, so you can send that. You can use it elsewhere, or you might want one domain for your entire application, or you might want to split your application out into different domains. And the bottom line is it's just a way of grouping together PO files. And then all we do is run the application. So all I've done is I've done everything that I've said so far, extracted the text files, done the translations, added this to my application, and then just run the application, set in the LC messages environment variable. This time I'm saying I want it in German, and what it'll do now, it'll do everything else for you. So that hello world, just by setting the LC messages environment variable, will then become hello Welt. And that's it. So obviously, if the user's already got that configured on their computer, then it'll straight away run in their native language. You can also change LC messages at runtime. I haven't tried it, because obviously there might be a case where you want one application running and generating different translations. I know Theo's got a module, haven't you, that reads the headers for the accept language. Yeah. And what I wanted to do in this presentation was, or what I thought I might do in this presentation is see whether that could be linked in, but I thought it's probably one step too far. But I just thought I'd mention it, that there probably is ways of doing translations on the fly as well as running the application in that particular language. So I've talked about the application itself. What I'm going to do now, of course, there's also the template files, which you have to treat slightly differently. So I thought I'd just touch on how you do the template files as well. In order to do the template files, you need some sort of translation function equivalent to the underscore in your template file. You can't use underscore. So what you have to do is you have to throw in your own translating function. I mean, this might be something that's nice to put in a plugin, but at the moment it's not. It's not too much code, so you just create your own translate function using that those couple of lines of code there, and then you pass that function into the template. So just by doing that bit of code there in my application, I then have a function called LOC in my template, which would allow you to do something like this. So rather than writing "we are dancing" as raw text in the template, I can put it within the translate function.
Can I ask about this?
Sorry? Yep.
Would it be possible to use a template to filter?
I looked at that and I thought this must be really easy, and I struggled to get it working. I mean, the short answer is there will be, but the brief, I sort of spent 20 minutes on something and I couldn't get it working. I mean, the template filter would be the nice way of doing it, and I'm sure it must be possible. I just couldn't get it working. This is the sort of quick and dirty method. But yeah, hopefully that's something that can be developed over time, and it would be nice if that was the way of doing it, because I agree, it would be a much nicer way, a much cleaner way of doing it. But just for the purposes of example, you can do it like this. In fact, the advantage of, a good point actually, I don't know whether if using a filter would allow you to do my second point here, which is extracting the strings, because of course what the extractor does, it looks for strings wrapped within a particular function. So I call the xgetText Perl script again. It scans this time all my template files, because I've passed it the template option. What I've also done is passed it the name of the function that I'm using to translate to the string. So you can see I've passed it in the template option with the lock function name. So I don't know, the short answer is I don't know. I don't know if there's a way of doing a similar thing but with a filter. But anyway, so yeah, rerun the parser to find all your strings to be translated. What I've done here, I talked about the domains. You can use the same domain as your application for the template files, but it's best to use a separate one just to prevent any management issues with scanning the files and rewriting and updating them each time. And actually the chances are you're going to have different strings to be translated in your template than your application anyway. So again, extract all the strings. I've not got an example, but it'll be exactly the same as the previous example I put. So it'll reduce the PO files and update the languages, and then everything will just work magically. Any questions on what I've covered so far? I'm just going to cover some more advanced options of that are available in the translating functions. So I showed you, I started with a very simple example of just two underscores, which is a straightforward constant string. But of course, there's going to be examples when you're going to put in other aspects into that string, so you might want to put in a variable. Now, of course, you could put your variable straight into the string at the top there, but actually that's not going to work, because by the time it reaches the translator, that variable will have been inserted, and then, of course, the translation string is different. So what this allows you to do is to have some constant strings to be translated and then insert the variables at a later time, after the translation's happened. And we just do it like this, so a simple variable name, if you want to call it that, inside the curly brackets, and then outside of that, just telling it what that value should be. Actually, sorry.
Is that X significant?
No, not that I know of. It's just underscore X instead of underscore. And the X just says expect some other parameters after this string. So if you didn't have the X, it would give you a warning that it's found some other stuff after the string that it's not expecting. And yeah, so that'll strip out the PO file as you've seen below, and that also means that the translations can still happen with some variable names within it. Incidentally, I really like this underscore. It's a bit like a printf, but with a nice clean interface. So I use this all the time anyway, even if I'm not doing translations. Yeah, it's a bit like printf, but easier to use. And you can obviously that where I've got Andy in quotes, that could be a function name or anything. So there's no more sort of messy concatenation of strings here. Just a nice clean way of putting it like that. So that's adding a variable. Another example doing plurals. So here's an example of saving a file. So for the first example, it's a singular. So sorry, what I should say is it's underscore xn this time. So for the first example, I've got saved one file, and then I've got the plural version. And underscore count is a special variable which inserts the parameter after it. So I've put the scalar at files in there, but you don't need to put the scalar in. That's just to emphasise where it gets that from. So it counts the number of files, inserts it in there, and then passes that number into the translation file for appropriate translation. Now, somebody asked me last year, can you have? Of course, in English, it's either plural or it's not. In other languages, if you didn't know, you can have different types of plurals. The short answer is yes, you can. What it'll do, and that's where your header file of your PO file comes in. So the header file of the PO file will describe aspects of that language, such as how plurals work. And then what it'll do is it'll pick out the appropriate plural. So you can see that in the PO file, I've got, for English, you just have a message string 0 and a message string 1. For other languages that have more, you'd have 2, 3, 4, and however many you needed. And the header file of the PO file would describe which one of those to pick. You don't need anything else in the first part of the text there, because it'll just pick out whichever translation string for the number that you've passed it. Does that make sense? The short answer is possible.
Can you use a range there, like from the amount 3 to 5, use this string?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like I say, I'm no expert on PO files, but I think you can do things like, I think there's like a sort of modulus and a shorthand if-else statement, the question mark colon if-else statement to say based on the numbers. I think you can pretty much write what you want. Yeah, so the answer is I don't know, but I think you can.
Can you combine it with named parameters? Because
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So this is the first parameter, the scalar files is the first parameter you replace, or?
Again.
So if you want to say, I saved, I don't know, 5 files for Tom.
Yeah, you can do it. I mean, what you don't have to use, the underscore count is just shorthand. You don't have to use that. So you could that could be count without the underscore. You could then put in the count. And I think that's right. I think the first parameter of the underscore xn is the quantity, and then any other further parameters are the text to insert. I've not used although I've used the underscore x a lot, I've very rarely used this one, but I thought it's a good one to give a demonstration of. But yeah, you can combine them. So that's plurals. That's the techie bit out of the way. In fact, that's the majority of my presentation out of the way. I thought I'd just mention a couple of ways of managing PO files. I've not tried any of these, but I just thought I'd mention that it's possible. So you can, of course, edit your PO files manually if they're simple, or if you've got a big application, you can use one of these applications. I think Pootle's fairly popular. Weblake's an online sort of cloud-hosted version, if you like. And then there's PO and a few others. I don't know, has anybody got any experience with any of these?
Always.
Sorry?
We use both.
Okay, does it work well? Yeah. Yeah, I have to admit I've never used any of these because my applications have just been very small, but just worked. And of course the advantage of this is you can give it to a non-techie to update your PO files. So just a quick summary. Obviously started with the LogReport itself, and that will just provide a way of nice logging of messages. One thing I didn't say on that, in fact, I'll talk about that in a second. Then I talked about translations. You can just prefix all your strings with 2 underscores, then strip your text and do translations later. One other good thing about LogReport, which I didn't mention, is that you can actually translate different backends. So you could have your syslogger in your native language, and then you could have the translations going to the user in a different language. So that means if your syslogger is, if your system administrator is English, he doesn't have to be trying to interpret other messages in other languages. And it's really configurable. Any questions? That's it.
When we work on those profiles and stuff, I think they're really cumbersome. And what we did is we added a callback in the log function, because that's actually a hash lookup. And you can very quickly see if the translation is there or not. And then insert the key in the database. So the other teams, the translation teams, can always look up all the untranslated things in the database. It's very convenient. And from that, we generate profiles.
So
we have the intermediate database, because this you can spread out to anyone, anywhere.
I was wondering that, because I thought it'd be quite nice, when you've got, say, a manual, it'd be quite nice to have all the text. Well, not necessarily, all the text in the database.
Tags from the source files we did in the beginning, but then we fell back to the other version, because now it's much easier to write untranslated strings, and you can also fix errors there much quicker, because it immediately pops up in the database, and then you have a filter that says, okay, just show those strings that haven't been translated in this language, and so it's a much quicker workflow. I can recommend if you do more of that. We did a lot of that.
Right.
Just have a database
that
generates profiles. I'm totally with you that you should have profiles, and we did it both ways. We can generate them, we can re-import them, and everything. But database and callback for logs.
I mean, that's good. What I didn't say, which you can do, is that string that you put in the application, of course, doesn't have to be a full English text string. It could just be an identifier.
Nowadays, I use tags more than English strings, because I think your example was very good with the save one file or save many files. So you see already in proper English, you need translation interfaces. It doesn't work without, even if you are English speaking and then write code for English speaking users. The developer is fine with, say, 0.5.
One question. Sometimes you have a situation where you have a lot of translations, like a lot of messages, but you don't want to send everything to the translations team because there's 10,000 of them and only 1,000 is basically used. Is there a way, an easy way where you could detect if anybody ran into the message? You know what I mean? Like if anybody
I do.
the page where that message actually appeared, because I don't want to translate all of them in advance, I want to translate them as they,
Well, it'll only extract the ones that it finds in the application, and then it'll put the line number where it is. Does that help?
He was asking more like statistics on where do I start translating.
I see what you mean. Yeah, I don't know is John's answer. I don't know. I have to admit I've hardly used the stripping tool at all. I guess the bottom line is it's a Perl script, and it probably wouldn't be if it's not in there, it probably wouldn't be too difficult to put some stuff out. I don't know whether it's in there natively or not. I'm afraid, sorry.
That's also very solvable by the callback. We actually have those systems.
Because you have a database link, you write right?
No, but I mean, you could just plot it in a plain file and analyze that later. You just need to write into a file that this string has been used. Just a callback.
So another question at the back.
Would you use this for translating date strings as well? Or specific date time for that?
I know that, it's something else I wanted to look into, and I thought I might cover, but I didn't have time to look at it into detail. I know date time has got its own way of printing locale. I would have. I wanted to look into that in more detail. I don't know, John's answer. It'd be nice to integrate the two, but I don't know. Sorry.
The PO files that translate from English to English, are they on GitHub somewhere?
No, they're not, sorry. There's another project I was opening up. But it's just things like, the old S versus Z. So Americans always write summarise with a Z, we write it with an S, or check with a Q and a CK and stuff. I mean, it's a small point, but if you're selling, if Americans start to see British English in their application, it's hard enough selling outside of the country as it is. If they start to see stuff that doesn't look native to them, then they don't like it. So, I'm told. Any other questions? No, thank you very much.